Hey, good afternoon. This is Legislative Review's regular once a month meeting time, the first Thursday of the month. We hope to be back on that schedule now after our 5 in a row weeks. It's October 7th, and I am ready for approval of the minutes from September 30th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. And I guess I will now send it over to Assistant Manager Jones to get us started on today's topic.
Well, I appreciate it. So as is customary, what we'll do is kind of go over a quick timeline of how we got here, and then I'll lay out the 3 topics that we'll discuss today and pass it on to Ms. Coburn. She's going to use a presentation to get us started. So, as you all know, August 3rd, 2021, our NDO was passed. Subsequently, the mayor gave the LRC a 60-day charge to help form a Human Rights/Human Relations Commission. At the very first meeting, we had consensus around, we wanted to call this a Human Relations Commission. Subsequently, we went on to the second meeting, heard from other municipalities talking about their experiences, pros and cons around their Human Relations Commissions and their experience around NDOs. Then we took the next couple of meetings to kind of create a framework of what we thought would be the appropriate time, scope, mission for an HRC. And then finally, at our last meeting, we kind of hashed it all out. And then subsequently, we took a recommendation to the full mayor commission at the last meeting. And at that meeting, Commissioner Wright, you asked for it to be tabled to the November 2nd voting meeting so we could have some additional public comment and give us an opportunity today to talk through some outstanding topics that we probably need to get through before we can actually solidify a formal recommendation to full mayor commission. Next slide. And this is where Ms. Coburn will take off.
Well, thank you, Assistant City Manager Jones. It's good to be with everyone today. Good to see your faces. As Assistant Manager Jones just discussed, you really have covered an extraordinary amount of ground over the course of the past, 60-something days or so. So the mayor's charge, 60 days, 60-day process, a 5-meeting process. Your input, we formulated the recommendations, drafted the ordinance, and now we're at the stage of gathering public comment in preparation and anticipation of a November vote. And so what are our goals for today in the Legislative Review Committee? So there are 3 primary goals. The first is to be able to spend some time discussing the budget that was included in the LRC recommendations. The second, which Assistant City Manager Jones is going to handle, is to discuss the Commission on People with Disabilities and to be sure that we review the history, the status, and some items that the mayor has requested with respect to the HRC in connection to the Commission on People with Disabilities. And then the third is with respect to the American Rescue Plan Act and reviewing some thoughts that the mayor has shared with respect to the HRC, with respect to ARPA as well. And so let's dive in. Our first focus today is to take a look at the budget. And as we go through this process, it's always helpful to sort of establish a touchstone. So thinking back to the mayor's charge initially, it was to determine the ideal composition and mission for a local civil rights or human rights commission situated to provide support to the Inclusion Office. And you as our LRC have decided that it will be a human relations commission. And there are some really specific priorities that you have identified in terms of the scope that you're wanting the HRC to be able to address. And we're not going to talk through everything on this slide, but we've done our best to sort of highlight some of the key critical aspects of functionality that you have identified. You're wanting this body to function as a bridge. You're wanting this body to actively foster and participate in collaborative two-way communication, all the way through our community with respect to community education, community listening, and community dialogue. You're wanting to ensure that this body engages consistently in community education, outreach, and recruitment processes that prioritize diversity, inclusion, representation, and equity. You're wanting to ensure that this body is going to be responsive to resident input, and they're going to be responsive to community data in order to develop and share policy recommendations with the full body of our mayor and commission. You're wanting to ensure that the Human Relations Commission may be able to receive assignments from yourselves, our elected officials. And you're wanting to ensure that the HRC is going to maintain an open pipeline of communication with our mayor and commission using tools such as their annual work plan and the drafting of an annual report. The Human Relations Commission is also responsible for assessing its starting scope and mission and providing recommendations back to the full body of our mayor and commission on whether or how to improve or refine its scope and mission moving forward. And this body needs to prioritize onboarding, communication with the Inclusion Office, and maintain an ability to change and grow in terms of its scope, functions, duties, expectations, and reporting, knowing that this first inaugural advisory board is going to need to handle a heavy lift in this regard. So that brings us to the portion of the LRC recommendations that currently present staffing and budget. And so what we'd like to do is just very briefly cover this section, and I promise it will be brief. And once we get through these two slides, we'd like to do sort of a quick round robin, to use Commissioner Wright's term, and just sort of go around to each of you and ask whether or not this recommendation aligns with the scope and the functionality that you're wanting the Human Relations Commission to provide for our community. So the first portion of the budget discusses the staffing and the supplies. And there are two positions that are currently outlined in the budget. The first is an HRC data and policy analyst. This position is really designed to ensure that the day-to-day responsibilities of the Human Relations Commission are being actively covered. They're responsible for project management, for infrastructure and process development, for ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion focused data and analysis is consistently taking place. And this will also be the position that needs to ensure that critical education, communication, reporting, and collaborative and strategic decision-making really become embedded in the functionality of the Human Relations Commission. The second position that is currently presented is a HRC marketing and outreach specialist. Sorry about that. And this role is really focused on making sure that we're functioning in alignment with your objective of making sure that Athens-Clarke County residents know about the Human Relations Commission, that they understand the application process, that they understand what the Human Relations Commission is working on, that they're learning more about what the Human Relations Commission is doing day in and day out with respect to our local government infrastructure, and then keeping in mind that you really want the HRC to partner with our attorney's office when it comes to our non-discrimination ordinance. This is the role that's going to be responsible for making sure that that information is accessible and understandable to people, and that it's actually getting into people's hands so that people understand that the Human Relations Commission exists, they understand our discrimination complaint processes, and that information is being made actionable. The second portion of the staffing and budget is focused on resources that will be really focused on the HRC membership body itself. And so one line item is focused on community events. Something that really has been a top priority that each of you has emphasized is that you're wanting the HRC to really function as a bridge into our community and a two-way bridge. And so part of making sure that that happens means that this body is going to need to establish a consistent and felt presence throughout our community. And one way to do that is through strategic community events. The next line item is focused on HRC marketing and outreach. Although we have a staff member who will be focused on that priority, there may be ideas that this body develops among themselves. And so ensuring that they have some budget set aside to support them in being able to bring their ideas to life so that they're able to take action, that's what this line item is about. And then there's the training, onboarding, memberships, and work plan development portion. Something that you really, truly have driven home as a top priority is that you want to be sure that the Human Relations Commission is consistently supported with training on an annual basis, and that training needs to be mandatory. There may be times when that training is topical. For example, it might be focused on how do you navigate difficult conversations. Perhaps there's a training on radical empathy, or a training on community education, or a training on grassroots community outreach. And then there will be some trainings that are really integral to the day-to-day functionality of the Human Relations Commission, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion focused trainings. And so then there's the onboarding piece that we know we need to develop. And we know we need to establish the core skills that you want this body to have as they go through that onboarding process. And then we also know that you are wanting them to produce a work plan, and that you want them to be able to generate quarterly reports. And so the training really has to help them function efficiently and effectively, and ideally from the get-go. So that means we have to be sure that there's consistent team building happening with the HRC. So that line item is about $20,000. And then the last line item is focused on the priority set for ensuring that the HRC members are compensated via a stipend. And with $25 a meeting and 10 meetings and 15 members, this is the estimate that has been developed. And so to transition to you now, if we can do a quick round robin, the question is, does this budget align with the scope and function that you've identified? Commissioner Wright, would you be willing to start us off?
Well, since I did that so much before and it seemed like Jesse was at the end each time, well, let's go the other way. How about if we do it where it's Jesse, Ovita, Mariah, and then back to me? I don't know if that's the order you guys see us any lined up, but how about let's try that. Jesse, then Ovita, then Mariah, and Carol's listening, but I guess she'll send us a message if she's able to chime in other than just listening. Okay, Jesse, get us started. What you thinking?
All right. Got 4 questions. First one is, are these positions going to be housed in the inclusion office? Is that the idea? That's where they'd live? Okay,
It is
cool.
my understanding that is the idea.
Love that. Might be worth it to mention that explicitly on here, just so that's clear when we're passing it, or hopefully when we're passing it. And then would either of those positions be the person that would be the note taker at the HRC meetings and any of the major HRC sponsored events and forums?
Yes, I think that the data policy analyst, that would be a good role for that person to have.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. And then is website anticipated to be captured somewhere in here? I know the design of a website up front, if you really want it to look good and be done professionally, is kind of expensive, but then there's a certain amount of recurring expenses for just hosting content. I don't know if that's already captured elsewhere in the Public Information Office budget, but does that need to be in here?
Well, so I'm going to need to defer to Assistant Manager Jones on that for the following reason. ACC Gov currently uses a platform. I believe it's called Civic Plus to host all of our web pages. We do have some ability to tweak the design. So if you were to pull up the Inclusion Office web pages right now, you can see some of the efforts that we've made to do our best to make the information clear, accessible, and highly interactive. So at this point in time, thinking through what our Public Information Office manages day to day, what we would likely do is defer to their leadership in that regard, but really go out of our way to package some web pages that are clear and accessible and actionable for members of the public.
I totally agree. And if you've seen our Inclusion Office's website today, you can tell they've done a great job. But what I do understand is that what I'm hearing from the LRC members is that HRC, we want to try to take this to a new level and maybe set new standards with this board and commission. So all that being said, maybe this does get us into the realm of having a nicer website, but at the same time, I'm thinking about equity amongst all the other boards and commissions as well, appropriately so, right? So the PIO office and the Inclusion Office can certainly work together on that. And if there are very specific things that come out of maybe, creating the mission and the scope out of the HRC that's specifically tied to a website and functionality that we don't have, I think at that point in time, we could probably look into that.
Well, without being super attached to it, I guess my thought is it would seem worthwhile if we're going to start somewhere. You know, a comprehensive redesign of our entire county website is a massive undertaking and probably very expensive. But if we're kind of building something from scratch anyway, I think in terms of, you know, once an HRC is off the ground, just looking at a lot of the other HRC websites of other communities, they look very modern. They're easily engaged. I think they're more intuitive in how you navigate them than our government's website is. And so that to me would be worth investing in as a starting point, if that's feasible. I'd be curious to hear colleagues' thoughts on that. And then just the last thing I had was the budget for 10 meetings. I recall that we set that as a minimum expectation, but I wonder if it would make sense to budget for 12 meetings. Maybe we don't use it all. I mean, we probably won't anyway, because probably all 15 people aren't at all of them. But
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Vita, you ready?
Yeah. My comments, and I do agree with the comments of Commissioner Hull, so I won't revisit that. But Crystal, you mentioned about an operating budget of 20,000. That does not include stipends, does it?
Thornton, it is not.
Okay. So I guess then I would like to see that a little bit higher. I mean, if we got to negotiate and come down, that'd be fine. But I would like for us to try to budget it to maybe 50,000 for operating. And if our budget doesn't allow us to do that, because we could whittle down, but I think that starting budget should be at 50. I'm foreseeing opportunities to write grants to supplement some of the cost. But I would like to see that at 50, and if we have to, come down, that'd be fine.
Commissioner Thornton, would it be okay if I asked a quick question to make sure I'm understanding you clearly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's currently $20,000 allocated to community events, $20,000 allocated to marketing and outreach, and then $20,000 allocated for training, onboarding, memberships.
That's fine. That's exactly.
Okay.
I thought I totally misunderstood that. I thought it was just 120,000, and I didn't think that was going to work. Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Are those numbers okay?
Those numbers are fine.
Okay. Thank you.
You got some questions from Commissioner Myers in the chat.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Mariah, and then I'll speak to Carol's before me. How about that? You go ahead.
That sounds good. Can I ask y'all to slide back or scroll back to the slide on the outreach coordinator? Let's see, HRC. So, outreach specialist. Okay, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about what their role would be. Would it be like sort of amplification of messaging and materials developed by HRC members, or sort of trainings on how best to help them get their message out to the community? I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what that role might entail.
Of course. So we have been working on a draft job description, a caveat being working on. Would it be helpful for me to sort of read that? Would that be helpful?
Sure, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. The purpose of this position is to make sure that residents throughout Athens-Clarke County know and understand what the Human Relations Commission is, why it exists, and how it functions. The HRC Marketing and Outreach Specialist is responsible for designing, developing, and disseminating marketing, communication, data visualizations, policy infographics, DEI explainers, and local government explainers that are accessible, understandable, and actionable. This role is critical to multiple functions within the Inclusion Office, including the Human Relations Commission. The person in this role will work with each staff member in the Inclusion Office to ensure that what's happening within the HRC and the Inclusion Office isn't a mystery. This role will be vital in telling diversity, equity, and inclusion-related stories of residents and staff in ways that make data and policy processes relevant, understandable, and accessible. The marketing and outreach specialist is responsible for building connections, community, and managing, advising, educating, and helping to facilitate the development and distribution of marketing materials that educate and help facilitate consistent communication in relation to both the Human Relations Commission and the Inclusion Office. Collaboration, communication, focus, and listening are critical in this role. This position will also play a key role in building the foundational diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused marketing and communication infrastructure, and helping to develop a shared language throughout our community with respect to the Inclusion Office and the Human Relations Commission. As needed, this position will also perform routine responsibilities such as public speaking, outreach, strategic training and development, advising, marketing, external trainings, and presentations.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. One thing that came to mind, and I hope I'm not getting too far into like a tangent and suggesting this, but I do think it has a potential impact on the budget, is I think that bilinguality is also probably very important for this position. I think that interfacing with the HRC, I think for the person in this role could help build on whatever cultural competencies they bring to the role, which hopefully are pretty broad. But that language competency is something that is not as quickly mastered. And so I don't know if that then impacts that salary level, if that would be an expectation of someone in that role, might be something for us to consider. And I just really feel that given the underrepresentation of Latinx individuals on the commission and perhaps in local government, making sure that folks that might not speak English or who feel more comfortable and confident in Spanish have access to materials that are written by someone who is fluent and culturally competent in that realm. It would be really important for someone here. So that I didn't know if that might impact how much is allocated here for that salary. My second question was related to the HRC, the staff HRC marketing and outreach budget. So that is separate from the commission's budget itself for outreach. Or
So
I'm sorry, yeah.
So that's a good question. So the thinking is that the HRC marketing and outreach specialist is going to need to take consistent action, period.
Mm-hmm.
And then the HRC itself will likely generate ideas with respect to how they want to conduct marketing and outreach. And this line item here would be specifically for them to be able to effectuate the ideas that they develop.
So the HRC members would be empowered to create materials of their own for which they'd have a budget to physically create and distribute? Or would they be kind of passing ideas along to the specialists who would then create those materials?
We would anticipate as staff that it is our responsibility to provide thorough and comprehensive support to the Human Relations Commission. So our hope would be that the Human Relations Commission might say, we would like to do X, Y, Z, and perhaps that actually exceeds the budget that's allocated to the marketing and outreach specialists. But we know that there's this $20,000 line item specifically to make sure that those ideas are able to actually come to life.
Okay. I'm going to think a little bit more on that. I think that makes sense. But those are the only two questions that I had at this time.
Thank you, Mariah. I think that just hearing that job description was really helpful, and I'm glad you asked for that. So maybe when this comes forward in November, those job descriptions would be in there, and that would help the community as well. That really helped me. And hopefully, I think you touched on what Carol had asked about in the chat, is the ability for the staff to be also continuing outreach from the Inclusion Office in other arenas than just the commission. So hopefully, Carol, that answered your question on that. And I like the way you said that the staff outreach budget would be happening on a consistent action in the community and would likely start sooner than maybe the commission is brainstorming about their stuff. So it sounds like those might be on two different timelines as well. So I'm good with the 12 meetings versus the 10. I think on this budget, I'm happy about it being something that we can champion when the budget cycle comes through. If it's a recommendation, I hope it doesn't hold us back with the rest of the topic being voted on. And if we have to, I don't know if, it's a recommendation where the ordinance is separate. But I hope that we can get approval for this as a great example that can also help our other BACs be better. Commissioner Parker?
Thank you. I remembered my other question. With regards to the stipends, there's been discussion thus far about budgeting for 12 meetings as opposed to 10. Given that the other work that these members are going to be doing in the community, I've been kind of viewing the stipend as something that covers all of that work. So, for example, if someone isn't at attendance at a meeting, they still might be out letting people know about the work of the commission. They might be out distributing materials. They might be helping staff one of these community events. And so I wouldn't want to necessarily take $25 away from someone if they miss a meeting or something like that. And then getting into taking attendance and things like that, which I'm okay with doing for the purposes of understanding how active someone is on the commission. But I think that given their roles and responsibilities go beyond simply meeting attendance, I would feel comfortable figuring out another way for them, for us to disperse these funds other than like, I don't know, once a meeting or however else people are thinking about doing it. It probably wouldn't work like that, but does that make sense? That way of thinking about the way the stipend works?
So Commissioner Parker, if I could jump in right.
Sure.
Making sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, if a board member does not show up in a meeting, but they're doing other work in the community, they would still be eligible for that $25 because they're still doing the work, if you will. Is that?
I like us to consider that and be open to hearing from others if they disagree, as it's just something that I was thinking about, but not necessarily wedded to.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner Wright.
Perhaps we could capture it in 12 meetings or activities related to it, because something, it could be 12 assignments or 12 meetings. I mean, somebody could only come to meetings and get their $25, but yet not be as engaged as somebody who's out more, doing a combination of the two. So maybe we can list it as committee sanctioned or whatever, sanctioned meetings or that sort of thing. Does that capture a little bit what you're thinking?
I like that idea.
I definitely like the idea. And I don't know how the wording goes, Assistant Manager Jones, but I do know that going to a meeting, and especially if people are not even productive at that meeting, and you have somebody really working hard in the community, and this is totally different from some of our other community committees, that we do need to figure out, we need to acknowledge their participation and work. So I do think activities, maybe when they get in there and develop their work plan, maybe they can define it even more. But I do think that it's worth us putting it out there. I think it's a good idea.
Jesse's hands up, and I apologize, when the chat window's open, Jesse, I can't see you. So now I've got that closed, I can see better. And thank you, Sarah, for letting me know that. Jesse?
Yeah, I like where y'all are going with this idea that we want to acknowledge the valuable work people are doing elsewhere in the community. However, I do feel like it's important that the stipend be tied to the meetings of this body, in that work being valuable to the work plan of this body, I think is tied to those people also participating in the work of this body. So I guess my feeling on it is I'd like to keep the stipends attached to the meetings. I think that makes sense. However, when we look at the marketing and outreach budget, which is a pretty substantial amount there, I think a work plan could be developed that defined other activities people in the community, including members of the board, could engage in that would also be paid some amount to do that work, whether it's, outreach work and canvassing neighborhoods and such, or attending and facilitating other proactive meetings out in the community. But I guess I'm assuming if people get brought on to the HRC, there's going to be some kind of interview process. It's the people who are very active in the community that we're going to be most likely to want to have involved in this kind of work. So I think, the worry of having someone who just gets paid to come to these meetings and do nothing else is not one I'm worried about. But I would be hesitant to just say, like, you get a stipend to do what you're already doing without attaching it to work that's specifically tied to the HRC, if that makes sense.
Commissioner Buell, if I could
Okay.
add one thing, and I appreciate your thoughts there. I'm always going to try to bring us back to equity and for all the boards and commissions, and not that all boards and commissions get paid. So that's something else that we have to kind of come to terms with and figure out. But what's good for one commission, other commissioners or other commissions, boards and commissions will want the same thing. So I say all that to say, however we approach this, we also have to keep an open mind with our other commissions as well. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So let's. I think that was a good round robin, and we ended up really just with one little category there that we had some varying opinions on with that. But I think that in budgeting, we do need to have a set number that we can anticipate that would be allocated out from the normal expenditures within a department. And the stipends is new. And I think that we do need to have a defined number. If we move that to 12, we've already set the 25 and there's 15 members. I think that branching out beyond that number, whether it's an activity or a meeting, is going to be something that's going to be addressed maybe at another time to keep us moving forward with these three topics. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Jesse, is that okay to keep us moving? That we keep with it within those numbers, so that we're not trying to make it to where additional funds out of these other buckets can then start going to the individuals. I think that's a broader thing that's going to be a little more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, that what you're saying sounds like it aligns with what I was thinking, but I'm hesitant as the person who kind of dissented from our colleagues. I'd be curious to hear their thoughts on if they're comfortable moving on, because I think, Commissioners Parker and Thornton sounded more enthused about this, so I don't want to feel like my counter argument shut them down or something.
No, I think you bring up a really good point about people, being really active in the community out of just a social and personal interest as is. And it's necessary for them to bring that cultural knowledge and community knowledge back to these meetings for it to be of use to the work plan, and to share it with the others who are there. I'm going to keep thinking about whether or not the potential utility of having some form of compensation, perhaps, as I think you were suggesting, coming from the outreach budget for some of those activities, but I'm comfortable moving on right now.
I actually shouted that I was okay, and I thank Assistant Manager Jones for bringing us back to where we needed to be on this, and across the board. We're thinking about this one committee, and we got a bunch of other committees out there. So I totally get it. I think a stipend is a stipend. It's just a matter of appreciation for what people do. Basically, and traditionally, people have always volunteered to do these types of things. So there is a piece of volunteerism, of a person's passion, and then a thank you for, taking this on. So I do think those are kind of two different things. And I'm definitely willing to move on and not muddy up the water at this point. And I agree with Commissioner Hall on this.
So the question literally in front of us, is this going to, Crystal, if we answer this with a yes or no, does that get us wrapped up on this topic?
I think it does, Commissioner Wright.
Okay, I see Jesse has hand up and Mariah's hands up. We'll just answer this question and we'll go Jesse, Mariah, Ovita, Allison.
My answer to this is yes, with the one outstanding question of I'd like to hear others' thoughts on whether we should add something specifically about the website. I'd be in favor of doing that if others are as well. The deference to staff on how much of an amount makes sense.
Are you talking about website in terms of making it more our website more accessible, or funding for an HRC website separate from the ACC Gov site?
The latter is what I'm imagining. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, as a non-expert in web design, I don't know whether or not it would be covered in what's already allotted for marketing and outreach. Like, if that would be enough. I think that work could definitely be within the scope, but whether or not we need to amend the budget in order to capture that, I'm not sure as a non-expert.
Are you fine with the rest of it other than that topic?
I am. Did we get to Commissioner Meyer's question in the chat? I might have missed that.
Well, I think that in my mind, when Crystal read that job description, that did share that it would be other inclusion office duties as well as additional outreach.
Okay, yeah.
And so she's in her car now, and I think that we might be seeing her join in, and we'll make sure that she's had that addressed. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Commissioner Parker, if I could real quick, thank you for bringing that back up. And, I want to make sure Crystal's comfortable with this. And, as you all know, the inclusion office has got, more work than they can handle at this point in time. And that's why you're seeing the positions. But to clarify Commissioner Meyer's question, which was a good question, and Crystal, I want to let you answer this, but what I'm hearing is that these positions would work with HRC specifically, but they also would do other DEI work in the inclusion office.
That is accurate. So where we are at this stage of building the inclusion office is we have begun to really start honing down the scope of the office and identifying some core areas of functionality. In line with that, there are some action steps and activities that have become embedded with what we do. So for example, there's something that we call the Bridge Project, where we support multiple internal ACC Gov departments. Examples of those programs include clean and renewable energy, minority recruitment and retention, minority participation in ACC Gov procurement, nonprofit capacity building. So we are involved with departments internally and supporting them in that regard. We are also the go-to when there are questions with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for example, the T-SPLOS process is something that we are involved in behind the scenes in helping to increase the application of an equity lens as we move through that and identifying improvements that can be made as we move forward. Another example of a program that we're responsible for is the Athens Justice and Memory Project. We are one of the critical players in terms of being support staff. And that is, the front-facing pieces that happen, but also we have weekly check-ins with subcommittees with respect to the Athens Justice and Memory team. We are a key player in terms of project managing that program. We are also working on rolling out internal training throughout ACC Gov. That is absolutely essential for us as a local government. We need to establish the fact that different employees at different workstations throughout our local government have a clear understanding of what is meant when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also have to develop the accompanying tools that people can hold in their hands so that as various processes are being evaluated and applied, we are incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into those processes. And then there's the communication aspect and building a shared language, facilitating community conversations using the inclusive platform. And I'm certain that there are things that I'm forgetting as we are talking with each other. So every member, essentially, I'm just going to be very blunt about this. Every member who joins this team at this moment is signing up to dive into the deep end. That's the sign up. And so there are specific focus areas that people have, but we all as a team have to be all in order to make this thing work.
Okay. All right. Ovita, on the budget, does a budget line with the scope and function you've identified or that we've been talking about for you?
Yes.
Okay. I think that in the top part, Jesse, I didn't want to leave that out either. I'm glad you brought that back up because I had it in my notes. Outside of what's been presented to us, I think we all agreed that the scope and function, the budget align. I think we're hearing that. And I want to be clear that things that are within the unified government need to be within the Office of the Public Information Office and that Civic Plus stuff. So when we talk about this, somebody having their own website, it still has to be within the unified government one. And we had talked about how our whole boards, authorities, and commissions are very tucked away. I mean, you have to go under the clerk of the commission. Who would ever think of that, right, to find it? But so I'm wondering if one of the statements that can come out of LRC with all the things that we're studying would be also a budget item, maybe just for 1 year, to give additional staff to work with the public, with Jeffrey's department for that website improved presence of just our boards, authorities, and commission, which is what is under us as the mayor and commission. And then if we had like a line item to contract work that's going to help under his department with sort of hit it really hard to improve the interface that we keep talking about wanting to embellish. Jesse, does that capture, and Mariah, not leaving it out, but actually bringing it out from under, not having it under this, but our studying tells us that we want to champion through the budget process something under like that to help with all of our boards and commissions, improve visibility for people to get on them, understand what they are. And then this one obviously is going to have additional feedback loops than typical boards.
So am I hearing from you, Commissioner Wright, that adding a line item for the budget, but leaving the amount as like TBD, and maybe tasking the? Is that what you're saying? Like it does make sense to put it in there, but we can't. But we need someone to come back to us with an amount.
Yeah, I think as for the five of us in LRC, if when it comes time to the budget and when they're saying what items, what are your 3 priorities for the budget, if all 5 of us can chime in and keep remembering that this is something we want to champion and carry forward and continue to explain the importance of it, and then the limits are, we see in it now that's a budget item we can champion to have done, but not have it tucked in this budget. That would be the strategy that I think would help us so that it's capturing all the boards and authorities and commissions as well as this one. Okay, can we think about that and move forward with this, with the other 2 topics for today? Jesse, what are you thinking?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, what you're saying makes enough sense to me. I'm fine with that. I guess the one other question I wanted to ask was just timeline. I mean, if we're talking about the budget that we're going to pass next June, that would preclude us from having any money allotted for any of this work between now and June. But my understanding was we were hoping to maybe get the HRC established sooner. So I don't know if you, Chair Wright, or staff thinks it would be worthwhile to devote a small amount of time to talk about when we might discuss a budget amendment for this year's budget to get this off the ground sooner.
Can we put that in another meeting of LRC to do that, since it's not, it's more involved with the, it's more involved than the people who are here. You see what I mean? That topic involves us getting Jeffrey here. Since it's another topic, it's a different group of staff for us to learn how that would be. Or how about I ask the mayor how we should handle this priority that we have, and maybe it's a new assignment. Nikki, do you have any insights on that? How we can come around with this?
Well, I think I understand what Commissioner Huell is asking. Are you referring to the staff as well as the HRC itself's budget, and if we want to get this thing going right now, as I understand what you're saying is that, maybe there's some more actionable steps, or there are actionable steps like right now that the LRC mayor and commission can take.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is if we wait until next year's budget, even if everything we're talking about here gets in, there aren't actually people in these roles on staff or the HRC until like September at the earliest, with just the standard turnaround time of getting job descriptions posted, interviewing people, hiring them, getting them on board. And so if we don't do it sooner, then I think we're looking at least a year before this is really active. And I'd feel comfortable, making part of our motion in this meeting a recommendation to the mayor and commission to consider a budget amendment, by the end of this calendar year or something.
Commissioner Wright, if I could right here, first let me, just be clear that staff's position is always to put budget items into the budget process. So, let's just say this is a $200,000 budget. I think it's less than that, but let's call it a $200,000 budget. We do not currently have funds in our budget for that. So we would love for this to go into the budget process. However, to Commissioner Huell's point, if we do want to get this thing taken off as soon as possible, we could go into contingency, which is not something that we would ever recommend or that we like doing. However, for priorities, LRC, Mayor and Commission, you all can do that. We would not recommend the full $200,000 budget going into contingency. Maybe selecting something like one position and a marketing budget for a person, which we'll call $70,000 or whatever, would be a little more achievable, if that makes sense.
Could we have a revised, we want to call it like interim budget presented to us, like what that would look like for something that we could start with that's a little more modest, just to get this off the ground?
So a budget that would go into contingency, and then a full budget to actually do the HRC as we have shown.
Yeah, I share Commissioner Huell's concerns. At the same time, I understand dipping into contingency that deeply is not advised. And so I would like to be able to get a sense of what a more moderate sum to get this body started earlier might look like in order to make that decision to see if that would be worth doing.
Okay, so to not do this in this meeting, but to carry it forward properly, Nikki and Crystal, would you be able to outline a fair and reasonable starter budget that we can get approval to amend the current budget, while this is the bucket we're going to recommend comes in the new budget? Does that capture what we're talking about? Sort of a little starter packet, so we don't have to wait.
I think so, and I think that we could address both Commissioner Parker, Commissioner Huell's points, and then staff's general issues with going into contingency as well.
Right, and then you can give us a reasonable amount of like which the strategies it would take for the staffing, while then we would be working on getting the interview process into the BAC's timeline.
Yes, ma'am. I think we can put something together.
Okay, and we can, in committee, do you think we can just sort of review that in emails before this gets in the next packet?
If that's okay.
That sounds all right with me. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the vote that really matters is the one that happens in our general body meeting, right?
Yeah, I think we're just fine tuning and learning the, what's a fair and reasonable contingency ask to keep this moving. We've already got our pace going. I agree that we need to continue to roll it out and get the staff that is needed for that.
And I do think it can be a fraction. I mean, if we look at the total suggested budget here, I mean, it would be at most half of this total budget, just because we're only looking at half of a year. And I don't think we need to include all this stuff at the outset, but at least like the $25 a meeting and probably at least one staff position, like the data and policy analyst who takes the notes.
And that's why I was hoping that staff could outline what that would look like as well.
Commissioner
certainly can.
Wright,
Yes, Crystal?
could I ask a brief, quick round robin question?
Sure.
Okay. Would each commissioner be willing to share what your ideal timeline is for rolling out the HRC? If you sort of had to pick, what month were you hoping and or expecting for the HRC to begin rolling out? Is it possible for us to do a really quick loop, just sort of covering that?
Yeah, I'll start with me to see if we can get the quick thing going. I'm thinking that if it hit the ground running in January, if you were having your staffing start, and that our application process would be the next, what is that? I think maybe February, March is where maybe our next boards, authorities, and commission application process would be. So that'd be January, and that would give us time to promote getting the people on the commission to be able to have applications in March. But that's just off the top of my head. Mariah?
I was thinking similarly. I don't know if that's too ambitious, because I didn't really count through the number of voting cycles it would require to approve the budget, and then from there, post the positions, fill them, and then as well appoint the people, do the interviews, and then appoint the folks. But January jumped out to me initially as well.
Jesse Ovita.
Yeah, I think ideally we would, this is my ideal timeline, we'd vote on some kind of budget amendment in conjunction with approving this in the November meeting, and that would give staff the opportunity to post a job description and hopefully be hiring someone around January as well. That sounds good. But whenever seems reasonable and feasible to staff after that. What I don't want to do is keep adding to this, everything needs to happen in this big hurry phenomenon that we're running into. I don't think this is the kind of thing that does need to be expedited beyond what staff would normally see as a timeline. So it doesn't have to be January, but January sounds good to me if that's feasible.
Ovita? Okay. So, Crystal, does that, and Nikki, does that, I know that's ambitious, but...
Whoa, I'm talking.
Okay, I didn't hear you. Talk up.
After Crystal gave that litany of responsibilities in her office, I just think that January is too soon. I would like for Crystal and County Manager Jones to tell us what will work best for them. I think they've done a lot of work already. They know what the work they still have to do. If they can get it, I guess Jesse kind of alluded to it. If January looks feasible without taking from all the other things, I'm good with that. But I'd rather for this office and this staff not to be bombarded about something not with another piece. We just do that so easily without asking. And I know Crystal asked us. I appreciate that. And our wishes have to align with what you can do and do well.
Okay, so that was a target, and then you guys can let us know what's realistic. Does that sound okay? All right. It is 5 till 2, and time for our second discussion, I think, item.
Yes, we are transitioning now. Thank you so much for that rapid feedback. We really appreciate it. We are transitioning now to our second goal for the day, which is focused on the Commission with People on Disabilities. And at this point, I will hand the mic back to Assistant County Manager Nikki Jones.
Thank you, Crystal. All of our conversations today, super relevant to boards and commissions, of course. This is just a great follow-up, because I think this will provide a little more context to a lot of folks on boards and commissions and kind of the life of boards and commissions and kind of what happens and why it's so important to get the right people on boards and commissions, and maybe even why stipends are important. So the Commission on People with Disabilities, this is something that's inactive right now. This is a commission that's inactive. So, a lot of us were not here when this commission was stood up or when it was functioning. So a lot of the answers that we have right now, we're getting from the clerk of commission. We're getting from staff members who've been here for a while and looking at past emails. It's not really based on something that we have experienced ourselves. So I just want to put that out there. Here's what we do know, though. Crystal, if you could go back real quick. It was adopted, the unified government of Athens-Clarke County adopted this commission in 1992, but we do know that it existed prior to unification. The last known activity for this commission was in late 2007, and that's just based on some emails that we saw, some email traffic related to this commission. Next slide. Next slide, please. Again, what do we know? We know that the commission was in existence prior to unification, and we also know that there was a liaison to this commission, and that was the HED department at the time. That's Human and Economic Development Department. We now know that department as HCD, Housing and Community Development. So that was in 2004. In an email that we saw in 2004, we read that the commission was having challenges related to membership, members showing up at meetings regularly. They knew they were supposed to be having these events, and they're well known in the community to have these events, but they were missing some of those dates, and they hadn't had events in like 5 years per this email. Next slide, please. So digging in a little further, we wanted to understand their general authority. So you'll see the general authority in front of you, but I'll point out a few things. They shall be advisory in nature, and they are going to make recommendations to the Mayor Commission of Athens-Clarke County. They're just an advisory commission. Next slide, please. But we wanted to talk about some of the areas of specific authority, and I think this is going to be super pertinent to the discussion and the conversation that we might have today. So what did they do? They had the authority to solicit donations and support. So were they a 501c3? We are not sure about that, but they did have the authority to do that. They had the authority to go out there and seek additional grant funding, just like any other board or commission could do. Next slide, please. And I will go back and say that they are also responsible for education. Again, a lot of the same stuff that we've been talking about related to the HRC. Something that we found interesting here was that, they would recommend financial incentives to enhance the hiring of persons with disabilities in the private sector. So that was one of their key policy missions, if you will, or the key recommendations that they were making out there in the private sector and to the Mayor Commission. Again, here, taking advantage of training available throughout the state, just one of your typical activities that a commission would do. Next slide, please. And something else that you'll see that's pretty familiar, make an annual report to the Mayor Commission. So these are their areas of specific authority. A lot of the same things that we are asking our commissions to do today. So no surprise. Next slide, please. So this exercise is really tied to what the mayor has asked of us related to the role on the Commission on People with Disabilities. Is it something that should be reactivated, or is it something that can fit into the HRC? So that's a discussion that I think that we're going to have today, and it's going to be really important on which route that the LRC wants to go on this. So at that, I'll go to the next slide and then allow the round robin to continue to help answer this question.
Okay, I'm just going to throw out what I've been thinking about this, and I really appreciate the paperwork. And guys, just so you know, the latest email that Sarah sent has one additional document on it as far as downloading it. It is actually that one section of our charter that speaks to this commission. And then if you do, and it just came late, so I doubt if you guys got to see it, but it talks about it having 30 members and this sort of thing. So my first thought is that we could make a recommendation or statement back to the manager that we believe that this should be reactivated and maybe a committee assignment to modernize it. Capture, I thought their mission was good, might need to be modernized. I didn't think that this would be under Human Relations Commission. I thought it would be separate. That's my round robin. We'll go Mariah, Ovita, Jesse.
I also think that it should be separate. I also am concerned, and please, feel free to speak up if this isn't the case, but that we, as people that may not be closely connected to issues faced by folks with varying disabilities, might not be the best folks to decide whether or not this could be encompassed within an HRC, or if it is best served by a standalone body. In talking with disability advocates in the community, reinvigoration of a standalone committee has been of particular interest, and so it does seem like that is the direction that they would prefer to see. And so I'm kind of leaning in that direction, since I guess I also share concern that having this as part of the HRC might then force folks who, do identify as disabled to sort of fight to be heard amongst people that have varying other kinds of experience. Whereas within a body where everyone's an expert, on their own experience and sharing, a bit of what struggles they hold in common, might be more productive for recommending policy pertaining to this particular community.
Thank you for that. Ovita, then Jesse. Ovita, I can't hear you. I take it you're talking, but we can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back to Ovita, or she'll let us know.
Wait,
Jesse?
there I go.
There she is.
I'm on my phone, y'all, and it's crazy. But
well, thanks for being here as best you can. Your turn. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that this definitely needs to be separate. I think that the HRC, while it could look at disabilities and as in a way to avoid or recognize some type of discrimination, I think this area is a very, very, very important area, and I would hate for it to get lost.
I think we lost her on the word lost.
I would hate for this to get lost in other cases and situations that may become before the HRC.
Okay, Jesse, what are you thinking?
So I think the HRC has some overlap with the Commission on People with Disabilities. I'll call it CPD. But I do think there are important distinctions. I think HRC is expected to take some of this work on, but if they were expected to take all of this work on, then they wouldn't be able to do all the other work HRC is expected to do well. Nor do I think that we're setting up the HRC to be the ideal body to handle some of the things. So I imagine there is likely potential overlap in membership, and we would do well to think about how someone can maybe liaise between the two. But I would recommend that the CPD, Commission on People with Disabilities, be revived with the updated mission and scope, which I think is a lot of what I'm hearing from colleagues, accounting for what HRC covers. And in my mind, the most important place to start, or the thing that seems very distinct, would be a review of capital projects. So essentially, like what I don't think the HRC would do, but I do think a lot of people in the community want to see a Commission on People with Disabilities do, is review facilities and, renovations to facilities, creation of new facilities, to give feedback on their accessibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so for the round robin part of this, it sounds like we're in agreement that the four of us don't think it should be in HRC. I do agree with there possibly being an overlap with a couple of the members.
Allison, I'm here too now.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Thanks for joining. I hope everything's okay.
Yeah, all good. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm echoing what you all said. I heard all that comment and most of Nikki's presentation on this, or the end part. I agree that it should be separate with an updated mission and scope. I think what Jesse's talking about, the facilities, but also just the physical environment. I know that in terms of sidewalk and road design, that's been a really missing component, is having input from people with disabilities. And that's not something that the LRC would necessarily really be involved in terms of design, and, likewise with parks and such. So I do think there's overlap, but I think there's a lot of other areas that could take up quite a bit of time for this commission, reviewing facilities and getting input into design. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, and so it won't surprise me if the assignment that we're asking we get from the mayor when we send this recommendation. So Nikki, would we be just formulating sort of a statement to the mayor, and then I could send it as the chair that captures what we just said?
Yes, ma'am. I think that would be appropriate, and we would also wrap that into the agenda item for November 2nd as well.
Oh, that's right. That would be, yeah, because the whole point was to make sure we didn't leave that out in one with our commission. And then I think that when that gets revised, I think it will be, I'm less concerned about our new construction because of the new ordinances and the ADA. I'm more concerned about where people with physical disabilities are in older structures that should be modified to be more accessible. But I think that covers what we needed specifically on this task. If it's okay with staff, if this is our last question, are we ready for our last topic?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go for it.
And we'll just go right into the next question that the mayor had for the LRC in determining the role for the HRC. As you all know, we are currently working through the American Rescue Plan funding process, and as part of this process, we want to make sure that an equity lens is placed on projects, programs that are coming through these expenditures. And, the mayor was wondering if the LRC thought the HRC would be an appropriate place for, this type, or if it was the appropriate role for the HRC to kind of be the group that provides the equity lens on the ARP process, ARP projects, ARP programs. And that is the question before the LRC. So we'll go to the next slide, and I think there's just a simple question. Do you see this as part of the function and scope?
Okay, I'll go first, then Carol, Jesse, Ovita, and Mariah, just because that's the way everybody's lined up for me. I personally do not see this as an overlap with the HRC at this point in time. Maybe years down the road it could be. I would be more aligned with our citizens group input for ARP to actually get the IDE training, so that we're basically increasing the equity lens in our community feedback. But that's just my opinion. Carol, Jesse.
I see pros and cons of that. It's we have this whole that's a shorter term focus thing, and I feel like we might be overwhelming this HRC to have that in there as well, because there'd have to be this whole understanding of finance with this sort of like a T-SPLOST oversight with that. So I'm waiting to also see what others say on that, and maybe it's partially because it's not quite clear to me how the American Rescue Plan funding is going to roll out anyway. So it's hard to know what to do with this committee in terms of that, or what kind of citizen committee we have.
Understandable. Jesse?
My very short answer is no, I don't think it aligns. My slightly more elaborative rationale is, we were just talking about the timeline, where it sounds like the earliest we're even hoping this could be happening is early next year. And then, you both spoke already to the idea that I think we'd be overwhelming them by trying to stuff this in, especially stuffing this in with like the urgency of needing to give advisement, and especially just like how much public opinion there's going to be about the expenditure of this money, which I think will be distinct from all the other things that we're imagining the HRC will do. Much of that will probably also draw a lot of public opinion. So I really think this should be kept separate. Last thought on this is, if there's an existing body that we want to build from, I think maybe the Justice and Memory Committee would be a good place to start. The way the Lindentown resolution was written and some of the work they've already done with advising us on the budget last time around might mean that could be a place we could build from if we're not trying to start from scratch. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ovita, then Mariah. Okay, Ovita, we're ready. As soon as I say the next person.
There I am. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. Your turn.
I don't think it should connect to the HRC. I think there is so much questioning already about the American Rescue money, and I do think that we don't want to add to the questions and unnecessarily about this money. We are already spending a lot of this money for things that definitely need to be spent on, with vaccines and homelessness. So I get that. But I do think that based on the executive order, and that's that 1385-95 by President Biden, people are looking at that in the community. And I think that should be the basis. I don't know where it starts at. I know that in a lot of counties already, they are already spending ARP money on projects. I know tonight Statesboro is having community forums, tonight starting on community forums. So I do think that we have time to spend some of this money. It doesn't go to waste, but we should be intentional in the direction and the message that we're sending to the community. Thank you.
Okay. Boom. 2:15. Nikki, what's next?
Oh, I just want to real quick.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Mariah, I am
fine. No, it's totally fine. All I wanted to say was also no.
So
and
15 minutes.
I did what everyone else did. No, it's fine. It's all good. Everyone else already said. I'm particularly concerned about the timeline. If this isn't going to be up and running till March, I don't think that's going to work. So I'll leave it at that.
No, really. Go ahead and take it.
No. That's all. Everybody else said it more eloquently than I could.
Oh, good. We are so synchronized on that last answer, I think. Okay, now, Nikki, what's next?
So synchronized that we are done.
Heyo.
Hey.
Hey, well, then I'm looking for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor of us wrapping it up. Whoop, whoop.
Thank y'all.
Wait a minute. See everybody November 2nd. Mark your calendar.
See you then.
Good job, everybody.
Thanks everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good job.